I'm delighted to have you here this evening for this evening's author talk, a panel discussion featuring author Gene Kansas in conversation with Dr. Jacqueline Jones Royster and Ed Bowen, moderated by Mike Jordan. Tonight they'll be discussing Gene's new book, Civil Sites, Sweet Auburn, A Journey Through Atlanta's National Treasure. As the birthplace of the civil rights movement and the one-time wealthiest black neighborhood in the world, Sweet Auburn is exactly that, a national treasure. Tonight's panelists, preservationist and social developer Gene Kansas, Professor Emerita of Rhetoric, Feminist Studies, and Cultural Studies at Georgia Tech, and more impressively, The Ohio State University, Jacqueline Jones Royster, and businessman, lawyer, and fourth-generation Atlantan Ed Bowen have put a lot of work into making sure we all know it, and their work is incredible. Ed, in particular, deserves a mention for his work to preserve the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge on Auburn Avenue. He made the excellent decision to get the Atlanta History Center involved, and we have been honored to help with his efforts to preserve such an incredibly important historic building and its contents. Now it's my pleasure to welcome tonight's moderator, Mike Jordan. Mike is the senior editor of UATL, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution's Black Cultural brand. He is a longtime cultural journalist whose work has been published in the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, National Geographic, Rolling Stone, Southern Living, and Atlanta Magazine. Mike is also the founding editor of the Atlanta edition of Thrillist. In addition to Thrillist, he also co-founded Canopy Atlanta, a community journalism organization, and serves on the Atlanta Press Club's board of directors. In 2023, he was a finalist for the James Beard Foundation's Jonathan Gold Local Voice Award. And in 1924, he won the James Beard Foundation's Jonathan Gold Local Voice Award. Please join me in welcoming Mike Jordan and tonight's panel. And be sure to come back tomorrow night to see David Levering Lewis talk about his book, The Stained Glass Window, which is incredible. And it's all about Auburn Avenue, among other things. Anyway, tonight's panel.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening. Wonderful to be here. As we see, everyone's just going to sit down. We're not going to do too much early pomp and circumstance because it's going to be an outstanding conversation, a very fun conversation with someone who I call a friend of mine. I don't mind saying it. They don't think journalists have friends, but it's true, we do. And I've known Gene Kansas for about 10 years. Yeah. It's about 10 years. He's become a friend of mine, and he's someone who, when he told me he was writing this book, we talked about it, and I said, wow, something that, writing a book is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. I mean, like, what a sacrifice. But no, I remember him talking about this book, and I remember him saying why he wanted it and why it needed to be published, and his passion behind it was something that you could not just hear but feel. So to me, I wanted, if everyone doesn't mind, just starting with a round of applause for completing a book that got all of us here this evening. So a round of applause for Gene Kansas. Absolutely. While we're doing these claps, I know that we clapped for everyone, but we are in, high esteem with our fellow panelists and members of this platform that we have tonight. I asked backstage, I said, how should I address you? Is it doctor? Is it Mrs.? She said, you can call me Jackie. And I'm like, I don't know if the crowd would appreciate me calling you Jackie, but I do appreciate it. And maybe by the end of this conversation, I will be calling Dr. Jacqueline Jones Royster by Jackie. I don't know, but we'll see how that goes. We'll see. But I would like everybody who has not already read the bio that was on the web link to getting here and getting your tickets to just be aware, again, when we're talking about journalism and documentation of things and reporting, nothing is more important than the research that goes into it. You need to know what you're talking about before you get the nerve to write about it and share that with people. But we're with someone who has done an incredible and outstanding amount of research throughout her career. So I wanted everyone to also give you an individual round of applause. And Mr. Ed Bowen, who I'd not had the pleasure of meeting before, despite us being in Morehouse around the same time. Isn't that right? Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But I wanted to just acknowledge you as well. A nice chapter of this book, which we'll get into, is about the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge. And I know that we will talk about the work you're doing. We already heard a little brief bit about it, but I think that's important. But in addition to that, we talk about history and importance of not just being an advocate, but being an active member of that for which you advocate. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people who would need an introduction to Mr. Bowen, but you're going to learn more about him today. So again, another round of applause for being here. Okay, now let's get to the heart of this thing. So I wanted to start by the fact of everyone who does not have a copy of Civil Cites, obviously it's outside. The author is here. We can kidnap him and get some signatures if y'all are with me. But this book, the first thing that I always notice of a book, and they say judging it by its cover, this is a gorgeous book. And things like that matter because we're talking about, in the irony of all of this, an area of land that is known for being a place of beauty, a place of community, a place that represents a spirit of the city of Atlanta and the people who made that street something bigger than just a street. And there's an aesthetic there. So first of all, I wanted to ask the first question of Eugene, and obviously anyone who's seen it, there's just amazing illustration. The text, the type, the placement of things, it's just a really nicely done book just by the look of things. So I wanted to ask you, since that's the impression that you get first, what was important in terms of nailing how the visual representation of this book that you were going to make, what was important about getting that right?
Yeah, well, thank you. And quickly, before we get to that, thanks to you for being a friend. And I'm happy and proud to be able to, call everyone up here tonight a friend to me personally, and to history. And clearly, we're at the Atlanta History Center. Thank you all for having us here tonight. The book is an important history about Sweet Auburn, its birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement, and what that means not only historically and in contemporary times, but what it can mean for the future. Mm-hmm. Blessing and curse, I really get into details. Design matters. I remember having a conversation with Laura Flusci of MODA, Museum of Design Atlanta, and she kept saying, design's everything, design's everything. I'm like, I don't know if it's everything. But then I realized it's true. You can design a great program for the night. You can design your own path to the extent that's possible. In life, you can design a book. And it takes, like everything, a real team effort. And so, but before the team effort started, I went for years, because the book took me 8 years. So,
yeah.
Right, and we may get into that later. But for a number of years, I would just go to every bookstore that I could and look at books and see what looked good or felt right or was appealing or caught my attention. It wasn't until later, pretty late in the process, that I met a designer named Brian Simons. And this is kind of an advent, I guess, of technology. I've been working with Brian for years now. He lives in Cincinnati. I've only hung out with him in person 3 times. So a lot of the actual graphic design of this was done, basically virtually. And then Clay Kenningham, who's the illustrator, who really does bring life to these pages, I met when we were both at Georgia Tech. I was a grad student in the Ivan Allen College. Dean Royster was the dean there. Clay was in the School of Architecture. Clay was a student there. This will give you another indication of how long this book took. He's teaching now in the architecture program over there.
They grow up so fast, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you. It was a lot of work from a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it was important because it complements this history in a way that is designed to maybe compel someone to pick it up that may not even know about the history yet, but maybe they like a drawing or they just like design.
Yeah, yeah. And for me, when we talk about history, as we know, it is Black History Month. And you know, my job at the AHC, we're doing Black History Month coverage all month long. It's a daily story of, watch out Monday, I have one coming finally, get my own writing. But it's one of those things to where even when we approach things like Black history, which of course Sweet Auburn is Black history, it's all history, but there's a Black history that's a very foundational thing. Oftentimes, history can feel like homework, and not in the way that you look forward to it. It feels like a burden. It feels like something that you're being graded on, whether or not there's an actual school or not. You're supposed to know it, so take this history, and and you'll be fine with this history. But this book, when you go through it, I've read the book, and I'm also going back and reading the book again because it seems intentionally designed, as you're saying, for action. And it's meant for you to go out and experience Sweet Auburn. It intrigues the person. It drives you to go and do rather than just, collect or receive. And I think when we're talking about an area like Sweet Auburn, that's important because it's right there for anyone to access. It's been there for quite a long time. And yet and still, there's been this feeling that more must be done. More needs to happen. Some type of spirit of restoration and preservation and all of these things. So I know I just asked you a question, but if you don't mind, I'm going to come back to you with another question. You wrote this book, not me. Talk about your career in the sense of you're a real estate developer, and you are also a preservationist, and you also have some design, elements baked in, and all of these interests you have. But again, what is it that called out to you to be a part of a movement that, has historically been about a community that you don't necessarily belong to, but Sweet Auburn belongs to all of us. So talk about that. What pulled you and compelled you to make Sweet Auburn part of your life?
Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier this week, how what happens in our lives stays in our lives. And so there wasn't like some moment when I moved to Atlanta 29 years ago where I was like, I'm going straight to Sweet Auburn. Being born and raised in New Orleans and all that entails, good and bad, the gumbo of it all, I grew up in a community and in a city that's like a foreign country in this country. There's a lot of history, there's a lot of preservation, there are a lot of stories. And through a series of many different personal stories, I came to love history, architecture, culture, and understood preservation as something important without even knowing the name of it. And I've mentioned this a few times, but I think it's important to mention again. I was 7 years old when my mom took me and my younger sister on my 7th birthday to a musician's house, a family friend's house, and he had an in-home recording studio. And so I was born March 12th, 1973. We're coming up on a little anniversary. So for my 7th birthday, we go to this musician's house named Rusty Kershaw. His brother, Doug Kershaw, wrote the song Jambalaya for you music fans out there. And we get there, and me and my younger sister are playing. We're playing instruments. We're reciting poetry. Shel Silverstein, I think I may have mentioned that at some point to you, Jackie. We are telling jokes. And like 20 minutes in to what's become a 40-minute family heirloom, Art Neville, the Grammy Award-winning Neville brother, walks in. And I went back and listened to it this week just for fun. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how would a 7-year-old know who like
the
Art
Neville
Neville
brothers,
is?
yeah.
But when he walked in, I said, he's the big chief. Like, you knew.
Yeah.
And I knew it was important. I knew it was being recorded. So it's always been with me. Now, when I got to Atlanta, and being someone who enjoys exploring and adventure, and without the advent of GPS, I had a map and I explored this city, and I got lost / got found by finding Sweet Auburn. And seeing the incredible architecture and buildings, and you could and can feel the history there, but also seeing that it was in a state of peril, and being basically awake to that and wanting to know more of the story. And I could go on, but that was what kind of originally got me there, was just stumbling across it almost. And then through a career and just personal interest, learn more about the history, met friends there, like Mr. Bowen and others, and that, I couldn't stop at that point.
Yeah. I'm going to take a cue from Gene here and say, can I call you Dean? Is that okay? Like, we going up in status every time I talk to you, Doc. Like,
I answer to almost anything.
Well, I wanted to ask you, you know, as we talked about segueing from a place that, you know, when Gene found it and said found him, but seeing all of those reasons to appreciate it and sort of that initial moment for him. But can you contextualize for folks here who may not have had the luxury of being around for times or have researched as deeply and been involved and knows what Sweet Auburn means? Can you describe the spirit of Sweet Auburn to folks who see it now but who would have known what it was that earned the nickname Sweet Auburn?
Well, I think the easiest way for me to answer that is to talk about how it's so sweet for me personally. Because I think that I am kind of a poster child for how Atlanta generally and Sweet Auburn in particular become iconic to people who don't necessarily grow up here. And why would that be so? It would be so because it was an area, a geographical space that had everything, and all of it was exciting, especially to people like me. I grew up in a small town 72 miles away. Anybody who knows Greene County, that's where I grew up. But I actually grew up here because I had so much family here, east side and west side. My mother's family was east side, my father's family was west side. But this Auburn Avenue is where I spent so much time. Everything was there. My home church, Bethel, was there. My aunt's church, who, according to my mother, just sacrificed her whole history by going Baptist rather than Methodist, was also there. The city market was there, a place that I loved going to with my parents. I went because our town was small. Our African-American doctor was here. I had my tonsils taken out in Hughes Spalding, you know, right down the street. Because my mother was in graduate school at Atlanta University, I spent time with my cousins. All of her sisters and her brother lived on this side of town. And I went to the Bell Street Y for my first swimming class. And later I learned that it was the place for the first African-American policeman. You know, there are things. In my aunt's house, the Atlanta Daily World was always on the table. She was an insurance agent, right? And so, you know, the spirit of the community was because of the people who occupied this space. They made it so. They did things here that contributed to the quality of life of a whole community. The Prince Hall Masons, my father was a Mason, my mother was an Eastern Star. You know, all of these things were what made the community. And so when you talk about what is so special, why did it rise so iconically? It's because generation after generation after generation after generation made it so. And they did so on their own behalf, but in cooperation with whoever would help them to craft the kind of place that they wanted to live in. So it was not surprising to me to come to understand that Atlanta was the cradle of the civil rights movement. Because I also came to know not only about Ebenezer and Wheat Street and Martin Luther King Jr., but about the washerwomen. You know, people were engaged in life here. They were engaged in making a place for themselves and their children here. They were engaged in having fun. Don't forget about the Royal Peacock. I always bring that up. You know, so the question is, why wouldn't it be iconic? Not just for the people who lived here every day, but for anybody who had any kind of contact with the kinds of things that were going on here.
Yeah. I will just say real quickly, I've done some dancing in the Royal Peacock. That there's fortunately cell phones weren't around at that time, and me and my wife were first dating. We were at Pals, you know, quite often. So again, it still continued this legacy.
Yeah.
Mr. Bowen, I wanted to ask you the same thing, you know, and you're part of this ongoing legacy. Again, it's continuing through us on this stage, but tell us your experience with being part of that spirit and continuum.
You know, I was listening to Gene and Jackie talk about Auburn Avenue, and I'm embarrassed to say I have taken Auburn Avenue for granted. As a native, fourth generation, I attended Our Lady of Lourdes Elementary School, first grade. My grandfather was assistant principal at David T. Howard. We had family had a restaurant in Old Buttermilk Bottom. I don't know if anybody knows about
Absolutely.
Buttermilk Bottom. I have classmates whose dads owned the Royal Peacock and were in the original lottery business, the Georgia lottery business. I don't know.
That might have flown.
We called them number brothers back then, but so I grew up knowing about Auburn Avenue, and it was only, I think, in talking with Gene once about what he was thinking about doing in the Auburn Avenue area, and when I got kind of asked to develop this Masonic Lodge, I got deeper and deeper involved in this history. And I was telling Gene earlier, I discovered that my great-grandfather, who was a member of Big Bethel, was also a Mason, and also knew Heman Perry, and bought one of his insurance policies back in 1921. And Perry was the owner of Citizens Trust Bank and the drugstore down on Auburn and Butler. So I've always known Auburn Avenue, but I grew up on the west side. So I would only come to Auburn Avenue sometimes to go to the restaurants. But when I got involved in restoring this building, and I had a chance to talk to Sheffield, I saw Jack Piper in here somewhere. Jack is the architect for the building, and Jack gave me another deep appreciation for restoration work on this building. And Gene and I were talking quite a bit, and Gene would always say, "That's an important project, that's an important project." And I would just say, "Okay, Gene, right, I gotta raise this money," because even though the late Congressman Lewis legislated the building being included in the Martin Luther King National Historical Park, Congress never appropriated any money for the restoration. So going through the process of raising money to restore this building gave me a chance to get more and more involved in Auburn Avenue and its history. And it gave me a deeper appreciation for it. But unfortunately, I was a West Side kid. So, but I love Auburn Avenue now, and I'm proud to say that we're going to be able to restore this building, and it's going to be a jewel on the avenue at Auburn and Hilliard Street. So I'm excited.
I wanted to come back to you, Dean. A question I have for you is, you were involved in the book. You are an editor, editing for Culture specifically, correct? So I wanted to ask you, you know, like, in the spirit of cooperation and folks getting things done together, Gene was able to, you know, lean on you, and, you know, you were there. And tell us about, you know, like, when this book came to you and the process of you advising and getting an early look at what we all can now see and purchase outside. Tell us about, like, what the process was like for you.
Well, I'm a very people-centered person. And the project is centered in the man that you see sitting here. He was one of the students in my college. I read about him doing work with the Atlanta Daily World in the newspaper, and I sent him a little note because I admired that. I wanted him to be encouraged for the work that he was doing. And so with him asking me to read a couple things, I was glad to do it. Having that process turn into an official role as a cultural advisor is just the naming part. I think Gene said it best when he said, when you do work like this, it really is a collaborative effort. And so my role, or my coming to the project, was in my loving the neighborhood, my admiring the places, my, as I've said before, being haunted by the difference between what I experienced growing up, navigating Auburn Avenue in so many different ways, and what I found after living in Ohio for 18 years. When I got back, that was just not the same. I was haunted by what I saw, even though it was no longer there, because my memories kept getting in the way. And he came through with a project that for me was the preservation of cultural memory. And so my commitment was whatever I can do to help, I'm glad to do.
Beautiful.
Which was a tremendous amount, thank you. May I just?
Yeah, I was coming to you next, so jump on in. Yeah.
Well, so the little letter changed my life for the better. I mean, this is a daunting type of project, daunting work. When I got the letter from Jackie, I just finished leading a historic preservation of the Daily World building. This was in 2014. The grand reopening was in March of 2015, so we're coming up on a decade. My father had just died, new into grad school at 40, baby on the way. There's a lot going on, and running, a company, and I needed a lift more than I knew I needed a lift. And if it's okay with you, can I share from my memory the letter?
Sure.
So first of all, it was an actual letter, which meant a lot. This was not an email. And I got it. I remember where I was sitting, and I read this, and it said, "Dear Gene, this is from Jacqueline Jones Royster, the dean of the Ivan Allen College, and Jackie, the little girl who spent summers in Sweet Auburn, and from both of us, I want to thank you." And when you mentioned the little letter, I about cried. That day, I swelled with pride, with a sense of interest and inspiration, and kind of redoubled in my own commitment to preservation here. So thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know how anxious, it might make someone to be turning in manuscript pages to Doc here, and I'm just like, gosh. So, and we've talked about it before, but I mean, obviously there's the importance of getting it right factually, but then there's the importance of, again, someone who can not just, if necessary, to, readjust or align, but to also be able to move it forward and to, be an advocate and be sort of an ambassador to the book. So,
Well, I know Jackie loves me, but she didn't go that easy on me on the edits.
Okay, that's what I wanted to see. All right.
It was real.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real book that required real rewriting.
And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about, when you want to say something and you want to share facts, and we live in an era where facts are disputed in many ways, but you're thinking about a historical story, and so getting that right. I mean, talk about what you had to, adjusting your time. You said it so fast that I think maybe people didn't catch it, but passing of your father, child, married, by the way, so all of the things you do, and you do things, but making time for this and making sure that it was done to your satisfaction and to other folks who you would want to make sure that it was done that way. I mean, I don't want to just take away from the crunch of that. So I mean, just describe what it's like to go from start to finish in the meantime with that, I don't want to say burden, but responsibility.
It's a responsibility, and I mean, on a personal level, I wanted to make sure that I got it right. And then I'm a white developer in Sweet Auburn. What am I doing work down there? What am I doing writing a book about this history? I also felt that responsibility of like, I need to get the facts right. And it was hard because a lot of the history that ended up in this book is not easily accessible. Right. There are, the book's published by the University of Georgia Press, co-published with Georgia Humanities. Great resources through the New Georgia Encyclopedia, Auburn Avenue Research Library, and others. But there were so many people. I know for anyone that was at the launch, you may have heard this. There are so many people who have been hidden in history. That women, in particular black women, and all kinds of other people who were not the leaders of the movement, but who made the movement possible. And like, how do you find them? It is kind of funny, but it's not really. Like, there's no way I could have written this book without the internet, because I would not have had the same type of access. Right. And I, fortunately though, was captivated by the remarkable people and their lives and their accomplishments and their pursuits and their stories. I've always been into stories. I came from a family line of storytellers. Mm-hmm. My mom could tell a story about this water bottle that like we would all be like, what? What happened next? And so like I was interested in that, and I hope it comes through in the pages, but like Sweet Auburn started to come alive to me. And this is fun, very fun, not only fun, a true honor to be up with both of you all, because I'm also in the audience getting to hear about your stories. And this is live. I felt a lot of this being alive in Sweet Auburn by reading, but it took a lot. And Jackie was the cultural editor. I knew that was important for perspective. I'm not a woman, I am not black, I wasn't born in a segregated South, I've never been the dean of a college, and I could really go on and on. These are important perspectives to have. Trevor Williams, who is the editor of the book, grew up in the church. Church is a foundational cornerstone to Sweet Auburn and its history. Trevor was able to lend that to me. And then Molly Slavin, who was a Britton Fellow at Georgia Tech, helped with really citing a lot of things, making sure that like everything that we're putting in the book has a reference. Yeah. And then helped develop the curriculum. So again, back to like the collaborative effort, the team effort, that's a bit of how I was able to get there.
Yeah. And
I also found a typo.
Whoever finds it gets, no prizes. And also, you've been hard on yourself because, this, yes, white guy and not black guy, but you clearly know where the gumbo and the jambalaya and the Neville brothers are. So you were doing pretty good since a kid. Mr. Bowen, I wanted to come back to you. So as we're still talking about collaboration here, as again, I think it's page 76 when you'll see the dedicated page with, again, this beautiful illustration of the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge. So I wanted to ask you just about the importance of organizations like that. You can speak to that organization, but again, it wasn't the only thing that was group-oriented, building out and being an anchor to these communities.
Well, I felt, and I'm a member of the lodge, I felt an obligation to this particular restoration project because of who the Masons are. And you go back and after the Civil War, the Masons started in Savannah by a black minister, and they were involved in civic engagement and eventually moved from Savannah to Atlanta and was headed up by a physician, Dr. H.R. Butler, who was an activist. It went from his leadership to Maynard Jackson's grandfather, John Wesley Dobbs, another activist. So the Masons have been involved in basically making society better through their charity, through their civic engagement. And when those men in the 30s, in the midst of the Depression and World War II, came together and raised the money to construct a building in 1937, I felt an obligation to fulfill the dream of restoring that building because of who they were. And I didn't want to let them down. And then I had Gene always saying, that's an important building, that's an important building. And I love Gene's energy and spirit around Auburn Avenue, because even though he said, I'm a white guy, I'm down here on Auburn Avenue, I was surprised that Gene knew as much as he did about Auburn Avenue. Here, I'm an Atlanta boy, and I'm like, you know more than I know, Gene. But I felt for what John Lewis wanted to see us do before he passed away, because John had the legislation passed and through the House and Senate to create the opportunity to restore this building and make it part of the historical park. And I could always see Maynard telling me, Brother Ed, you know, you got to do this, you got to do that. So those members who were all throughout the Auburn Avenue community, the ministers, the doctors, the bankers, these are all members of the Masonic Lodge, and they were very much involved in the creation of Auburn Avenue and its spirit. Even Dr. King becoming a tenant in the building in the early 60s, he felt safe at that building because, as all of us know, he was quite involved in stirring things up and could have been easily assassinated before he was. But he was safe in the Masonic Lodge building because of the members, the history, and what it stood for. So I'm proud to be part of it. I had a chance to meet Jackie, found out she and my sister were classmates at Spelman. I didn't realize we got to talking, and you know, Atlanta's such a small community. But I appreciate what Gene did with the book, because the avenue has fallen down. And a lot of that is a result of the movement of the wealth of Black Atlanta from east to west. And you heard me talk about the west side. So most people moved from the 4th Ward over to the AU Center area, and then further west into Collier Heights, and then out now in southwest Atlanta. So that economic base that shopped and lived around Auburn Avenue changed over the years. So the doctors no longer were there, the dentists were no longer there, the lawyers, the bankers. So that caused a lot of the spirit of Auburn Avenue to change. And you had basically the clubs. As I mentioned earlier, a number of my classmates from Morehouse, Spelman, and high school, their dads owned quite a number of the businesses on Auburn Avenue. And they weren't necessarily always legitimate. I guess it's safe for me to say that now.
You're the lawyer. Yeah. You
But I'm proud to be part of this renovation effort. It makes me feel good. We were able to raise the funds. We're in the process now of doing some light demolition and abatement of the building. We will interpret Dr. King's office, the way it looked at the time of his assassination. The Park Service will take over that space just as they do the birth home and Ebenezer Church. So we, the Masons, are leaving an asset behind that people can go and look at, where Madam C.J. Walker had her beauty school, where we had an insurance company had their offices there. That was an office building. It wasn't just a lodge. It was a commercial office building constructed in 1937 when black men sure didn't have that kind of money to fund a project of that nature. So I take my hat off of those men, and I didn't want to let them down.
Let me
Please.
explain to you then what a cultural advisor can do. As people say, well, okay, so what did you do as the cultural editor? One of the things that I wanted to emphasize was that it doesn't matter what color you are if you appreciate the lives, work, living, achievements of a community, and you're willing to bring your insight, your expertise to the preservation of that memory. So it didn't matter to me that you were a white real estate person. It mattered to me that you cared about a community and the fact that its story needed to live on. The other thing, though, is that I am an English teacher. And I do care about the quality of stories. Yep. But I'm also an English teacher whose research has been in women's studies, and I cared about the fact that this story could not be just a man's story. Right. We wanted to have the whole community. And so one of the things that I was always pushing Gene on is to make sure that the women's voices and experiences were included. And I think he did a pretty good job of keeping that spirit and those voices in the text.
Thank you. I do remember one day I called you and I was like, well, who do you think are kind of like the top 5, women? She's like, well, you can go find that out.
Well, that's what teachers do, what can I say?
That's right.
Because the other thing is that while these stories are not easy to find, they are there.
Yes.
And they deserve the commitment to go find them. Yeah. If you really want to do a good job, do the work.
And if I
Get in
may,
there, please.
So I had, over 8 years, I had plenty of ups and downs. Mm-hmm. One day was particularly difficult. And we spoke, and you said, how you doing? And I said, not very well. And she was like, well, what's going on? I said, I'm overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. I'm having a real hard time because there's so many people and there's so many stories, and I don't know what to include. I can't include everything. And Dean Royster said, Gene, it's just one little book. And that set me free. It's like I did the best I can, but it was also, it's not just about the book. It's about your life and living it. And there were so many of these moments through working together, but also so many mentoring moments from reading about other people's history, definitely including as a major through line, if not the main through line, about the Masons. I mean, Mr. Bowen just said it, you are doing this in part because of the history of the Masons that came before you. We are all part of generations of people, and we're going to be, composed of the DNA and the work, good and bad. But it can really move forward, and I've taken a lot of great lessons from the history that was made possible by the people who came together in Sweet Auburn.
Well, one book can't tell the story because there is too much to the story. So you have to do the one book that you're doing the best that you can so that it whets the appetite for others that could come forth or that might be out there that nobody has noticed before. That's what citation is really about. You kind of cite other books so that people know that they are there and can be read, can be a part of the ongoing story. And so for people who think that one is done, you got another thing coming because there's so much leadership that came out of that community. There's so much groundwork that came out of that community because the civil rights movement didn't just pop up from the sidewalk. It required work. And a lot of that work was done by people whose names you may never know, but who did that work anyway.
Mr. Bowen, you.
Let me add something, because we're all talking about Gene. Gene and I've known each other for a number of years, probably well over 10, maybe 14 years, so we have been talking about real estate development. What really pleased me is I saw Gene's work. He didn't just talk it. If you haven't had a chance to see what he has done with the building he acquired and restored it, he just didn't talk about it in the book. He did it. And it's a great looking building. When he had me come down and meet with him one day, I had never been there. I said, where are you located, Gene? And he gave me the address, and I pulled up, and I can't curse in here, but I said, well, Gene, this is nice, and he did a great job on restoring that building. Yeah. So he didn't just write it, he did it. Yeah. And that made me feel good and proud. And when I said I didn't want to let down the Masons, I had to be sure I didn't fall short of what Gene had done either, because Gene had already set the mark, and I had to be sure that we followed behind what Gene had done. So
thank you.
He didn't just say it, he's done it.
Thank you. And got a lot of help from a lot of people, including Invest Atlanta, city's economic development. There are programs, there are a variety of different stakeholder leadership groups, including Sweet Auburn Works, Atlanta Preservation Center, the Georgia Trust, the National Trust, the History Center. I know Lord Atkins Sargent, you mentioned Jack's here. A lot of people who really care. And the AJC, thank you all very much, ran an op-ed that Jackie and I co-authored that coincided with the 60th anniversary of the passing of the Civil Rights Act, and this idea about preservation does not need to be limited to, and really should not be limited to just a building. Civil sites is a call to action for preservation. And we laid out, other ideas for preservation, including tapping into the liberal arts, the fine arts, design. And it's happening tonight through this program.
Yeah. Well, folks, I know that there are questions in the audience, and so I want to make sure that we give people time to get those going. So we have a microphone, and so if you'd like to ask a question of anyone on the panel, raise your hand, and we'll try to get as many as we can.
Hi, I appreciate all the interplay and the depth that went into this book, but I don't know the story of Sweet Auburn. I would love to hear a little skeleton description of what happened, and maybe 2 or 3 of the most important anecdotes about it.
Should we each do one real quick?
Yeah, I can do it. You want me to do one?
Yeah.
I mentioned him earlier, and I hope I pronounced his name correctly. It's Hemon, I guess they pronounce Hemon Perry. Yeah. He started a life insurance company in the 1917, somewhere thereabout. But he sold life insurance policies, and he built up a significant reserve for those policies. And he used those reserve funds to start a bank, a drugstore, an office building. He eventually got involved in the creation and development of Washington Park on the west side of Atlanta. And his business went under because he didn't have enough reserves to cover his expenses. So he was a major player. He and Alonzo Herndon were partners in some respects. But when his business went under, he had to sell the bank, the properties that he owned, and the drugstore, which was eventually acquired by, the bank was acquired by Mr. Milton and Mr. Yates, who went on and developed a number of drugstores throughout Black Atlanta. So he was a major player, and that's when I was telling Gene earlier, I was doing some research at home and found one of his policies that my great-grandfather had purchased in 1921. And so he was, my grandfather was part of that effort to make him a successful businessman. But he is worth noting in Atlanta in terms of who he was as an entrepreneur and a very, very wealthy and successful businessman.
Well, let me share with you the story of Bethel AME Church. Because that, as Gene was saying earlier, spirituality, religion was an important part of the community building of the area. And the people who founded Bethel AME did so much earlier, before the Civil War, with the permission of their slave owners. But the thing that I want to cite is that when they came into their own and took over their own church and built their own space and rebuilt it after it burned down, that was a part of the commitment of spirit to making sure that there was that spiritual anchor in this community. But it was far more than that. Bethel was the first place that college education began here because it was the home of Morris Brown College. That it started in the basement of that church. Up the street, Atlanta University in the Presbyterian, oh goodness, my vocabulary is leaving. It's not Presbyterian, I'm AME so thoroughly, I forget the other. No, it wasn't the Baptist, it's the
Pentecostal?
Congregational church. First Congregational was the home of Atlanta University. And what most people don't understand is that the first colleges in Atlanta were the black colleges, right? They ended up clustering on the west side, that is now the Atlanta University Center. But that energy came from here,
Bethel.
civil sites, on Auburn Avenue. So you have a church that was committed to educating its people. You have a church that was committed to supporting its community, to organization. It was the largest gathering space on that side of town for a long time. So anybody who wanted to speak to a large community of black people came to Bethel. So what you're seeing is that in terms of the evolutionary spirit of it, the area was where black people were permitted to live. The spirit was what they brought to the community. What you see as leadership, advocacy, action, commitment to building community is what happened as a result. And so this book gives you some of the stories. It's enough to whet your appetite, knowing that it is the tip of an iceberg of things that we could know about that area, but we don't.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And to build off of that and to add a testament to it, reading from Big Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church, it says, and about the Spirit specifically, Big Bethel's membership swelled after the Great Fire of 1917 destroyed all of the Fourth Ward's other black churches. Ironically, the same force that helped propel the church nearly destroyed it just a few years later. In 1923, an inferno engulfed the newly renovated sanctuary just one day after its insurance policy lapsed. With the church forced to rebuild, black architect J.A. Langford offered a new vision and destiny with a Romanesque revival design that reflected the church's Victorian roots. A signature steeple and pipe organ were added during Reconstruction. Resurrecting the congregation's spiritual home required faith and perseverance in the face of financial hardship. Lula B. Jones and Nellie L. Davis, who sang in the church choir and taught at Sunday school, sought to raise funds by selling tickets to a play they wrote that was accompanied by spirituals and hymns. Their prayers were answered several times over. Heaven Bound debuted at Big Bethel on February 17th, what's today?
19th.
1930, and went on to enjoy overwhelming success both at home and on tour, where it had been performed before more than 1 million people by the early 1970s. And I went this past Christmas and saw Heaven Bound, and it was incredible. So that's a little bit about some of the history, and there's a lot more in this one little book and many others, which, by the way, we have 100, I went and counted, 105 different additional readings listed in the appendix of the book.
Next question, please.
Okay, I have a two-part question, and I'll make it fast. My husband and I live in Old Fourth Ward West. We've lived there for almost 23 years. We found out on our own research that we live in Buttermilk Bottom. Buttermilk Bottom's fascinating history, Old Fourth Ward, fascinating history. Now we have developers that are coming in and trying to rename us Sono. We don't want to be renamed Sono, and we want to respect our history, all my neighbors. So number one question is, how do you get people to respect our history? And number two question is, what's killing Auburn and downtown is the lack of people. How do we get people to move back downtown?
Well, I will dive in with my English teacher hat on and my women's studies hat on. The one thing you cannot be about it is silent. You have to speak up. I'm a researcher writer. I like to write about things. I like to make what I know known to others. And I like to share what other people have discovered and respect that. So part of it is getting out there and telling these stories and making sure that people understand that there were things going on that should be preserved and respected and remembered. I had relatives who lived in Buttermilk Bottom. I remember going to my great aunt's house and sitting on her big gray, soft, cushy chair as a 6-year-old in Buttermilk Bottom. And it hurt my heart to know that her family was pushed out to the west side, across from Mosley Park, as a matter of fact, because of the same kind of spirit that you're talking about. What we know is that that is happening in what you're describing is happening in cities across this nation. It's not just Atlanta. And we won't keep the memory of what we know if we don't get active about it. I can't tell you what to do. You have to see, this is what I can do. Gene has chosen what he can do. He preserves buildings. I write little stories wherever I can. I teach people in classes, or used to. I'm retired now and loving it. So it's, what can I do to make these memories present with other people and to invite people to value them in a way that says, you might want to change things around here, but you're going up against a whirlwind.
And the second question, how do we get people downtown, correct? That's a good one. Anybody want to pick that up?
Well, you know, it's a function of economics. You know, land cost it drives the cost of rent, and land cost is higher in the inner city than it is in the suburbs. And construction costs are fairly constant. I mean, it takes you the same dollars to build in Buckhead as it does over in by Morehouse College, but the land cost is different. So the land cost in Old Fourth Ward has gone up significantly than when it was when I lived on East Avenue right there off of Boulevard. So now, as you notice, all that new development around Old Fourth Ward, Ponce City Market, coming back now south towards Emmett Park, it's prohibitive for most people to afford to live in that area, and certainly downtown has not been as attractive as a place from a residential standpoint because the businesses moved west, or north rather, to Midtown now in the Buckhead. So what used to be a very successful business community at 5 Points has completely changed. So those factors have caused people to be reluctant to come downtown if you don't have affordable units and you don't have services. It's not easy to do, but it needs to be done. And hopefully the renovation or the new development at Atlanta Medical Center will have some positive impact, hopefully. Hopefully there are some churches on Auburn Avenue that own significant land. Gene, I won't be able to go back to Auburn. I keep talking. There are a lot of issues. I had to talk offline because I'll get in trouble because this is being recorded, isn't it? But it's not as easy. But Old Fourth Ward has done tremendously well in the last 5-10 years than what it once was. Back when Maynard acquired the old Sears building and tried to make it City Hall East, and now it's a completely different area. But I don't know if that answers your question. No.
But part of it is the commitment to want to understand that historic residents, with a T, residents, my southern accent's getting in the way, still need a place in their community. That's what affordable housing is all about. Can people who once lived there afford to live there now? What sustains them? You know, what kinds of things can we do to solve this solvable problem? These are not unsolvable problems. They are solvable problems. Whose head needs to be in the room for us to figure this out? What kind of commitment of funding do we need? Why did Ed have to take, how long have I been retired now, 4 years?
Yeah.
4 years to raise the money to start doing the modest reconstruction in his basement. What is the commitment of the city, the community around us, the nation, to making sure that the memories are not unrooted from the people whose memories they are?
Yeah. And I heard this recently from a friend asked me, do you know why businesses change? And I was like, no. And he goes, because their customers want them to. We're the customers.
Yeah.
You know, like we can get out, we can vote, we can speak up, we can attend programs, and that will ultimately lead to the company changing.
And you can make your personal commitment to do whatever you can in the neighborhood to do whatever. Do you come to see Heaven Bound? Do you go to the city market to buy your greens? Do you do you choose a coffee shop that's on Auburn Avenue? That is a choice. You can commit to doing that. You can say, I can do 3 things this year or this spring in the area. Will that help a business stay in business?
I say go get some jerk chicken in the market. It's
There you
outstanding.
go.
So, hey, that's just me. I'm hungry. I think we have time for one more question. Is
Okay,
that right? Maybe one more. Okay, great.
Okay,
Let's go.
good evening. Thank you all. And this is a beautiful, beautiful book, beautifully illustrated. The question I have is, Dean Royster, you spoke about the activism on Auburn Avenue, and I'm a native Atlantan and was told about Daddy King, Reverend William Holmes Borders, and John Wesley Dobbs petitioning Mayor, I think it was Hartsfield, that they said they'd vote for him if they would put money into building a high school over on the west side that celebrated its 100th anniversary last year. That's Washington High School. And also the black police officers also. So those are 2 things that, like you said, the activism that came from Sweet Auburn got us in this city and started building all the other Atlanta high schools. I'm a graduate of Frederick Douglass. Yes, I am. But thank you so much for talking about that. But that's something I would just like to ask you to give a little more history behind that, too.
Well, I always start before that, because you know who told those guys to do that? The women in their lives. Because that was the neighborhood union that did that.
Yeah.
They worked for 25 years to get that high school built, to get that park for those kids, to get Atlanta University to have that rich sociology department that it had, studying that community, get that vote from 300 people in the community to 3,000 in a matter of days, canvassing that neighborhood. They did that work. We talk about Dr. Butler. Well, there was Selena Sloan Butler, his wife.
That's right. Yeah.
Doing stuff. So what I'm saying here, oh, and Mr. Dobbs had 6 daughters, all of whom went to Spelman. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And Maynard's mother, as I recall, was the first person to get a library card in the city of Atlanta as a black person. Yeah. And we talk about the way that activism happens. It's with people doing things. That's why I couldn't tell you what to do to save the story of this community. You have to decide what you can do and encourage other people to do what they can do, and those with the expertise and the capacity to solve the problem, getting their heads in the room and committing to doing more things like Gene Kansas is trying to do. So, you know, yes, the activism is rich here. The organizational structure is rich here. Atlanta, I said at the Auburn Avenue Library, we talk about the Atlanta Way. Well, a part of the Atlanta Way is people figuring out to get done what they need to have done. It's the kind of community that you want to live in. Can you make it happen? Yeah, if we work together, we probably can. We've done it over and over and over again, and not just in one community, in a lot of these communities around here. And can we do it in a way that makes Auburn Avenue an ongoing story that honors the people who were the original creators of that community?
Let me add some. The woman that Jackie's talking about is Mrs. Hope. Her husband was the president of Morehouse College, John Hope. She teamed up with Perry to help get the support for Washington High School because he was involved in developing Washington Park. So that's that Auburn Avenue connection. And it was John Wesley Dobbs who was responsible for getting the mayor to hire these black policemen who had to dress at the Butler Street Y. But all that came out again, that's that Auburn Avenue spirit and connection that Jackie is talking about. But we
and
don't.
it's the neighborhood union. That's
Yeah.
what Eugenia Hope started, the neighborhood union, a part of the Black Club Women's movement, which was a nationwide movement that made a lot of change in this country that people don't always talk
What
about.
you heard me say, she was married to a Morehouse man, right there.
Love those Morehouse men, what can I say?
Next question, please.
Hi, thank you all for being here. So I am a Old Fourth Ward resident. I live on Howell Street. I also give historic walking tours. If anybody is interested, please let me know. But as both a resident and a fellow researcher, I was wondering to know if there were any, well, I'm sure there were, but if there were 1 or 2 or 4 stories that didn't make the cut, what were they? And yeah, I guess what were they?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so many, and I think that we reference this in the book about how the people in this book could fill volumes of their own. Just for fun, I decided to go on AI. I like Claude and Gemini, and I typed in how many books have been written about Martin Luther King Jr. And the response was, I can't give you an accurate answer, which I appreciate about AI because it's like going to use something to give the quote unquote truth. But what it did say is like well in excess of 10,000. Now that's not including many that were never published or like published maybe in another country, on and on and on. There's so many. I didn't like go out and have like these lined up and make selections. It kind of just went with a storyline more than anything else, and followed kind of a east to west or west to east orientation. I did really want to include the streetcar in this. You know, when you talk about the success of the streetcar, I've heard that, well, it's not successful because there's not enough places to go. There's not enough things to do. I disagree. There are 45 places in this book that you can go to on the streetcar, and there's a map to the streetcar. I do think we need more residents, though, and they need to be going somewhere. But there's nothing that's like just jumping out as not making the cut. Howell Street, by the way, did make the cut. And it's a great street with a ton of history.
Well, the thing to emphasize is that it's not so much what was left out as what was hinted at without the capacity to go deeper. So you could talk about the beauticians, you could talk about the hotel owners, you could talk more about the Girl Scouts, you could talk about the various restaurants and businesses that cropped up around the big businesses. There are all kinds of things that you can notice just on the main drag. You could talk about who were really the healthcare providers around there. What was schooling actually like? How did David T. Howard become David T. Howard? You know, there are all kinds of things that we could go deeper in doing and knowing. So this is profiles might be a better word for your thinking about what is left to do. There's not left to do. And where did the people work? How did they get there? What was the street life about? When you talk about richness of this kind of community, I'm thinking about some of your stories here. Street life was real interesting on Auburn Avenue. There are all kinds of things that we can embrace as significant to the quality of life that came about within these communities and that took root in a way that spread west.
Yeah, and being from New Orleans, you know, it's comedy and tragedy. Cemeteries are seen, very conspicuous. Death is celebrated like life there. And just thinking about, which is a very good question, and then Jackie, what you're saying, there also are essays in the book that are about places not in Sweet Auburn. And two came to mind, Oakland Cemetery and historic Southview. But those came about because of the research on Cox Brothers Funeral Home, which really led to a ton of research on black burial rites. And this belief by blacks that, some that only through death could they truly be free. And then Heman Perry and others from Citizen Trust Bank, and who ended up starting Southview, and Benjamin Mays, and like I tried to actually include in almost every essay where someone's buried. That's, you know, the beginning and the end of just a life, but it also goes well before and well beyond that life. So good question.
You won't have a loss of things to discover if you kind of look around a little bit.
Yeah.
All right, we'll take our last question.
I want to thank my friend Ed Bowen for inviting me here tonight. This has been a phenomenal discussion. And Gene, I haven't read your book yet, but I am very excited to take a very deep dive into the book. And I wanted to ask the question with respect to the intersection of civil rights, and particularly what happened during segregation and the impact that segregation had here in Atlanta. I look at Auburn Avenue as being kind of like the Wall Street of Black Atlanta, right? Wall Street as well as the commercial corridor, the spiritual corridor of Atlanta. In your research and as you're approaching your stories, what did you mention or reflect about that?
About how segregation.
The impact of segregation.
Well, one event, horrific event that occurred was the 1906 Atlanta Race Massacre, in which an estimated 30 people were murdered in the streets by black people, by angry white mobs, because of misinformation about alleged crimes and other made-up things. This was during a time when segregation and discrimination were already the law, and a lot of people were afraid, and coming together in a community where you have a lot of history, like Ed was saying, why did Dr. King go to the Prince Hall Masons? Out of an interest of safety and other things. And it also had a radio station where he could, you know, go and get on the air, and a lot of other reasons. But from my research, Sweet Auburn, which was coined by John Wesley Dobbs as sweet, you know, kind of thinking about the commercial success, the cultural nexus that it was, but it was sweet only because everyone had to be forced together. And then Ed and Jackie have already talked about how there were people who left the neighborhood once that was a possibility. So it played a big part in the creation of Sweet Auburn, and I guess desegregation played a part in, you know, people leaving. So I would say that it's consequentially important.
There are two pieces to that puzzle. One is a group of people who fight for a long time for the right to do things, for possibility, who manage to have more of choice open up to them. And so you cannot cannot take that lightly as something that was not important to the ongoing evolution of the community, especially after World War II, when there was more energy coming back from those battles to have the kinds of opportunities that people really wanted for themselves and their children. And when they got that, they took it and they were able to evolve. But the other side is, what were the policies and practices that continue to constrain a community so much that it had to fight to stay alive? And I don't think we should ignore the fact of how hard the Auburn Avenue community fought to remain alive so that we still have it. And so it's that balance of wanting opportunity, maintaining what you have, and creating a path forward that allows you to take your strengths with you as you continue to evolve. You don't forget. Right? And so segregation was a point where possibilities were made and taken and treasured. Desegregation felt like a window, but in some ways it became a door. Now we have an opportunity to rebalance all of that with more of a full community commitment to the kinds of things that should be embraced and celebrated. So it's not perfection. We don't want to ignore the pain that comes along with all of that I did not say. But we want to recognize that the community remained strong enough to be resilient enough to survive. And here we are with a glorious book called Civil Sites.
Well, so 3 assignments that we have. One is to make your ways shortly to the stand where you can purchase Civil Sites, Sweet Auburn, A Journey Through Atlanta's National Treasure by Gene Kansas. Second thing we need to do is make sure we're looking at the curriculum ideas of this, because there's more to learn. And again, this is an actionable book. So, get on down to Auburn Avenue if you've not been there. Again, Great Jerk Chicken. See Constellations if you've not seen it. But lots of beautiful things. The Masonic Lodge and Prague, everything. Go and see it all and become maybe a little bit of a preservationist yourself. And the last thing is, please join me in giving this amazing panel of guests all the applause that they deserve. And that does it for us. We'll see everybody on the outside. Go grab your books, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you to the Atlanta History Center, and thank you, Gene Kansas.